And hello once again, and welcome to the Civil War Regiments Podcast. I'm excited today. I have a studio full of Tennesseans with me today, and we're going to go over a lot of different topics. But it's been a little while. It's been a month or so since I did an episode, and so I'm looking forward to some new content to be sharing in the next few months and the year ahead. And to get things started today, my guest this afternoon is Patrick Landrum of the Independent Rifles and from Middle Tennessee. And we're going to go over a lot of living history topics, history, everything about events, some of the events coming up that I'll be attending myself. I look forward to. But Patrick, I want to welcome you in, and I want to thank you for making the drive down today, man.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. What's your first impression of Civil War Regiment Studios?
It's it's good. It's nicer than the apartment that Brian DeRoche used to live in Mobile, for sure.
Yeah. I forgot to confirm with Brian. I guess he is not coming today.
No, he's not going to make it.
No. Yeah.
They've got a lot going on at the park.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's hard. I still need to find a way to just take the studio down there, and we'll do a live from Fort Blakeley episode. That'd probably be good. Or I'll wait for the next event, the next Blakeley event. We'll go down. But yeah, Pat, I'm glad to have you, man. And because I think a few months back when I posted pictures, you're like, when are you going to invite me down? And so here you are. We'll see how many heckles we get from the audience for all these episodes today, which there's quite a rooster in the audience too over here. But anyway, alrighty, sir. But, with every conversation I have, I kind of like to begin with just a little background, and so I know you've been involved in history and hobby for many years, but when and how and where did it all kind of begin for you? Where did Civil War history kind of find you?
So my dad, there's three boys, and he was obviously divorced from both my mom and my stepmom at this point. So he wanted to do something with each one of us individually. So my older brother got chess and literature, big Tolkien people. I got history, and my little brother got fishing in the outdoors. So Dad got into Civil War reenacting the 125th Atlanta, which would have been 1988, and he was in the 3rd Mississippi Company E, which was the unit down the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And he started bringing me out in 1989 at the fall muster event at Beauvoir, Mississippi, in Biloxi, Mississippi. So if there's, most of the people that reenact that probably hear this fall muster probably just eye rolled, but that's where it really started for me. And I tell everybody that when we talk about the hobby, as I kind of get toward the back end of my active participation in it and things like that it's really weird because I knew how to reenact before I knew how to swim or actively ride a bike or anything like that, but it's always been something that I've done.
Yeah. Wow. And for reenacting like that. So how old were you when you first started?
I was 5.
Wow.
Yeah, at my first event.
Wow, that trumps everybody in here, I think, right?
It wasn't even alive. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't alive either.
No.
Wow.
I told them the story on the way down that we were we were at an event recently, and Jonas Patrick was sitting there, and we were talking about Chickamauga in 2003, the living history, and Jonas just starts laughing. He's like, "Bro, I was 1."
So, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is funny how there's this trend right now in the living history hobby where there's all these 15, 16, 17-year-olds who are coming straight into the hobby, but they're kind of spoiled, they're coming in straight campaigner.
Yeah.
But yet they haven't gone through much in life yet, and all of a sudden, anyway, I could go on a whole tangent about that.
Catalogs where you could order or the very first.
The Civil War Courier. I remember the Civil War Courier. I subscribed to that.
I remember,
Chase Gazette.
I remember paper unit newsletters.
Yeah,
was a thing, or every Wednesday and Friday you'd get on Jersey Skillet Liquor and see if it what's new, what's Joe got. But yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I started getting involved in the campaign thing. My first event was Pickett's Mill in 2001.
Okay.
And I wasn't even supposed to really. I had no idea about that. I went to Raymond 2, which is where the guy got shot.
Okay.
And I was walking by a friend of mine in my mainstream unit, and they were talking about this other event. I'm like, I'd just gotten into campaigning, and I'm like, well, I want to go. So I went over to my mentor in the hobby's house when I still lived in Mississippi, and Dennis basically, he's like, bring your stuff over. We're going to play a game of this is good and this is not. So we go over there, and like, I've got, he's trashing my stuff and everything like that. And, I ended up going to Pickett's Mill with like 2 weeks notice. And like, that's really the event that kind of changed. Ultimately, like looking at, being 40 and looking back at that amount of time, that's really the event that changed my life, because that's actually where I met Liz.
Wow.
Where I met my wife.
Okay.
Like completely, on a lark. So,
that's a good segue, because I do want to ask you that, not that, a lot of us have this hobby is a family affair for some of us, but for you particularly, you meet your wife within the hobby, and some of your family's involved. So talk a little bit about that, meeting your wife and your family's involved.
So, Liz grew up in Kentucky, and her father was Chuck Warnick. Well, is Chuck Warnick. And he was commander of the Western Brigade, did stuff with the Mudsills a little bit, and was the commander of the 1st Federal Division for a while. I think like one of the oddest things that he told me about, like, was when he was in command at Perryville one year, was whenever he got announced to the federal troops that like we had invaded Iraq. So they had been, Liz's mom and dad met in the hobby. They got married, had Liz, and I think let's see, she was less than 6 months old at her first Perryville. So like she grew up like really being involved in it. And then we brought Hannah, our daughter, to a couple like Blakeley, and she was at Lookout Mountain Living History. Our son is turning 4 in February, and he hasn't really gotten to go out. Just like the pandemic kind of threw a wrench in a lot of that. But, we all, like, Hannah refers to it as like, she's like, oh, Dad, are you going Civil Warring? Like, she knows that I'm not going to be home when she gets home from her grandparents today. She's like, where are you going Civil Warring at? And I'm like, I'm going to do a podcast. And I'm like, she's 8. And I'm like, do you know what a podcast is? And she's like, yes, I know what a podcast is, Dad. So, but they're involved in it. I mean, I think one of all of our friends, Joey Ricci, who just, I don't even know if that's an official thing, but he's going to be promoted to the historian at the Battle of Franklin Trust.
Wow.
So, as part of like having a miniature version of myself, I take my son to get haircuts and everything like that. And he wanted to, I'm trying to immerse him in this too. So, we go and get haircuts and go and get donuts, and we stop at Carton. And Joey's like, has he ever been in the house? I was like, no. And so Joey takes him in the house. And as we're walking back to the Fleming Center, like, Joey's like, it's like 6'5". I mean, he's a monster, and he's walking next to this, 4-year-old, 3.5-year-old smart mouth. And he just looks over at Joey and goes, Mr. Joey. And, he looks down at Finn thinking he's going to say something nice to him. And he just goes, this place is the worst. Just like,
give him a few more years.
Yeah.
He'll nerd out eventually.
Yeah. But, it's I mean, even, like when we go down to Perdido Key for a beach trip, like we go over to the forts and stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an accepted thing in, the kids' lives. I mean, even, they were at, they went up and stayed at, some friend's house when we were doing Sharpsburg, and then came out, which is kind of cool to have, like, they were staying with Michael Clark, who's at the time was the commander of the Liberty Rifles. And, my wife and Mike's wife are very close. And so it's kind of, a immerse thing with that. So.
And, I have a couple of things about that too, where, for a lot of guys in the hobby, there could be a lot of cases where you're married to someone who doesn't really understand the hobby, or be like, what are you doing every weekend? So I'm sure it helps in the long haul that you're married to someone who grew up in the same hobby. and has that kind of understanding.
Yeah, I can't really come into the house and her be like, "Where'd you get that?" And I was like, "Oh, I've had this jacket." It's she'd be like, "You have not had a Montgomery jacket. That is not the jacket that you've had." So and she's really tolerant about it. I mean, I've been, she and I have been together as long as like the Independent Rifles have existed as a group. So she really has been involved, from day one. Like, when we did a living history at Fort Donelson in 2006. And that was when we, there used to be a museum at the Lowe's house prior to its current incarnation. And they actually had a piece of Confederate cornbread there, like, hard bread made out. So I had a mold made off of that was given to me. And Liz had to make all of this Confederate hard bread in my college apartment. And like, I didn't have a rolling pin. So she did it with a shot glass. So like, we ended up having like, I don't know, like she had to make like 800 pieces of hard bread, so she's always been involved, but it's, now that we've gotten the two kids and everything, and, things, it was different, for a lot of years because, we didn't really have all the stuff. And then, you start getting into like, we started pushing the envelope and getting a couple more things and like having boxes made, because it really, if you're trying to interpret to the public, it really gives that visual, and it should be what the Army looks like.
Yeah.
But if you go back and look at like pictures of the first time we did a big Blakeley, the commissary department's like a box and like one fire.
Yeah.
And then, really getting in depth to it and becoming friends with, like, going out and doing stuff with the Liberty Rifles, and then seeing them, well, it just kind of like, it's almost a challenge at that point.
Yeah.
Right? You want to get all the tents and all the stuff. And when we were leaving the Lookout Mountain living history, it's when I had to tell Liz, I'm like, she's like, why, what's going on with that well? I'm like, I bought the well. And she's like, where are you putting that in the garage? Because like, we have a 2-car garage, and like, there's my Jeep in there that hasn't run in a while, and then there's just a bunch of Civil War stuff. Yeah. So like, all of our cars are parked outside, and I was like, it's going to live at JD's house, it's not living at our house. So that's been the joke. Like, anytime something shows up, she's like, where's this going to live now? Yeah. Like, it's going to live somewhere else. So,
oh man, well, that's great. And thinking about your kids too, I wonder, being born into all this, how that will impact them as they get older. Because like, I know for me, like, I didn't have it all when I was that age, and I was later in life, so I got into all this. But like, my younger brother was born into it, but yet, and he never, I mean, he likes history, but he never really dove into it like I did. So you just wonder sometimes how that works. Like, will this be the thing, like, oh, this is what mommy and daddy do, and not like what I want to do, or are they going to be just involved? And I know, like, that'll be the interesting journey to see how they find.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own thing, so we'll see. But going back a little bit before we go too ahead, let's go back and talk a little bit about the origins of the Independent Rifles, and how did that start? How did that come about? Was that like the first group that you were part of, or how did it all begin, the Independent Rifles?
So when I first got into the authentic side of the hobby, I was a member, or I became a member of Claiborne's, which, Claiborne's to me, looking back, really should get as much, if not, an equal share to reputation as like the Mudsills, because, they were the Confederate version of the progressive movement, really. At least out west. So I was fortunate enough to go with those guys, met a lot of really, really good guys in there. And one of the people that I met through that was Justin Morris. And Justin and I became friends. He was hanging out with John Duffer and his group and the Moo Cows. And then, we started doing, it just became this loose talk thing about, like, we should organize a group. This is back in the early 2000s when like the mess mentality is like a big thing. And we just wanted to be able to, form the basis of one of the companies for the Western Independent Grays like Duffer's Company, and then like also be able to do our own events where it was, really, just be able to get together and do company drill and not really put so much pressure to the only time we can go in the field is when the WIG's doing an event. So we form up in 2004 and, form the group then. And, this is like end of 2004. I move up to go to school at Middle Tennessee in 2005, and we host our first living history at the Carter House. And, Justin was the commander of the group. We had, 4 or 5 different messes that were going with us, and it was, probably 30, 35 man company. And then, all I wanted to do was cook. I didn't want to do command stuff. I didn't want to be a sergeant. And, we go through the motion, and then Justin ends up taking some time off from the hobby. He was doing transitional stuff and was a sheriff's deputy, and was a new dad and just really didn't have the time. And that's when I moved back to South Mississippi in 2006. And we already had the group, so we just kept doing events. We did Vicksburg Life on the Line, which I know I don't think that was like one of the hottest events that most people that I reenact with still talk about. Is
that the one where a few guys like had rats?
Yeah, that was. Okay. Yeah, I was one of the ones that ate rat. Yeah,
and you're still with us today, so
no, it was a rat. Matt Woodburn actually researched like a food grade facility, so these are the kind of rats like people feed to like snakes and everything like that.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I had this great relationship with the national park down there, and Rick Martin was the chief ranger that we worked with a lot. And Rick comes up and he's laughing because like I told him all this stuff that I was doing that like nobody had any idea about, like like I issued just straight chicory, like there was no coffee substitute in it, so like guys are having like caffeine headaches at like 11 o'clock.
Yeah. And
he walks by and he looks down and he goes, "Come here," and he's like, is that a squirrel? And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Well, the only other thing I can think of that's shaped like that." I was like, "Yes." And there's this moment. He's like, "Are you really going to make guys eat that?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not going to make anybody do anything." Like, but yeah, we sat there and ate rat at Fort Garrett at Vicksburg.
Yeah. There you go. Right, scratch that off the bucket list.
Yeah.
Man, so going from there, I guess I should say too, regionally, what was your regional pool for the independent rifles? Like
back then, I mean, we
everywhere?
we had guys coming from Texas. We had guys from Tennessee. That's really Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. That's really how like Vicksburg kind of became like our central hub. Like there was a time where we were doing like 4 and 5 programs a year with Vicksburg.
Yeah.
Like to the point that like I knew the security codes to get, into the park and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, it just, when I moved back to Tennessee in 2009, it just kind of shifted from there. And, we're still, I think that the last 4 or 5 years has probably been the better events that we've done as a group. There's just a lot more detail. I love working with Calvin Chappelle down at Confederate Memorial Park, and we're the only living history group that's can do stuff at the Battle of Franklin Trust sites. And I know I really don't do like adjuncts or mainstream reenactments. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. There's great groups that are doing stuff like Chris Jebb just did the federal adjunct at Chickamauga, and they did great, and the guys that were there had a good time. It's just not something that's for me. My time doing this is limited. Well, so I can only do so many events, but
like you just said though, you stay busy with between Fort Blakeley, Franklin, and winter quarters. Like those are 3 semi-annual events usually, and so like those keep you busy alone, along with some of the intermingled ones like you had the Perryville effort this year and things. But if you could talk a little bit about the importance of some of these sites like winter quarters and Franklin, obviously, and Fort Blakeley, and how you guys are some of the primary groups supporting these sites.
Yeah.
And that's an honorable thing that you guys are the primary group for Franklin.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, it's looking back at the pictures from the first event that we did at Carter House, that's when like the gymnasium was still there. So like the Carter Hill Park, like you see it now, is it's not what that park looked like in 2006.
Yeah.
The gas station and Wig Shop and Pizza Hut and the Domino's were still all there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was, the flower shop, trailer, everything was still like the Carter House property cut off at the slave cabin. And like it was just that one rectangle. So to really look at like, tangible evidence of like things that we've actively participated, donated, money to, and, the relationship that we have with like Joanna Stevens, who's the curator there, Eric Jacobson, who's the CEO, and Joey Ricci, who's a historian for the site. It's just like, it really is a blessing because, and the bad thing is when you do events at the same sites, you have to do something fresh or else like it gets stale. So, that's like, we've done the march, federal and Confederate, different perspective, and we're going to be doing another federal program for them on the anniversary weekend this year. We're doing the 57th Indiana Company C, which, Wagner's guys don't get a lot of respect. So we're gonna do that, talk about, that Indiana regiment and, do our usual battlefield donation thing to them and give back to the site, with participation and with funds. And I think that is absolutely important because if you look around at, a lot of people get tied to these sites and things like that. And you can see it on social media where they've got a romanticized idea about it. And if anything changes, like the interpretive title changes or anything like that, or they find things through new research, people get, triggered just quick. And, you always look at them and it's like, it's great that you have passion about it, but when was the last time you ordered a book from the gift shop website? Yeah. Or, you came to the site and actually paid to go on tour, and actually like gave something back. And, that's really where like my interpretation, my interpretive ideals lies. Like I want to go to a site and like leave it better than it was, when we first started going there. It's like, Perryville is, Liz grew up like an hour drive from there. So like when she would just have a bad day, she'd drive down to Perryville. That was like, that's why we did the event. Like it had nothing to do with me. And, her and Jim Conley would sit there and talk about, different portions of the battlefield and like regimental movements on it. And I'm just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And, I ended up like, she was talking to me during the, the calls, like leading up, we're on the phone with Jim and she's like, I think the best march route would be if y'all like, went from this location and, I'm just sitting there blank. And she's like, what is wrong? I'm like, you might as well be speaking Greek to me. Like, there's some really good books out on Perryville, but it really was never a campaign that like I paid a lot of attention to. And, she's just like, just like the look
you
of
married
shame.
Right.
Yeah. I married right. She's sitting there rolling her eyes at me. And it's like, such a loser. You don't know about Perryville. But it just, we've had some relationships with parks and things like that didn't work out. But, my goal, like what I want to be able to do is walk away from, active participation in the hobby and be like, look how much change happened. That's like, the one thing that I say about Brian DeRoche is like, if you think he's the one person I can think of more than anybody that's like physically changed a park.
Yeah.
Like his whole hand is in that place. Cause if you did Confederate there, the first couple of years prior to like 2019, like there were trees all the way up to the redoubt. And like he has not single-handed, but he has been, the driving force in clearing that out and making that Redoubt 4 look like Redoubt 4 did in 1865.
Yeah.
So.
And that's what I look forward to every time I return to Blakeley is there's something new and something newly preserved again and it's expanding.
Oh, yeah.
And there's new earthworks revealed and it's like a giant Civil War playground.
It is. He cracks me up because the last like windstorm, one of the things that has bugged him for years was all the pine trees and the fishbowl and everything in front of between 15th Mass and Redoubt 4.
Yeah.
And like they had a massive windstorm and like, I called to check on like him and his family and he's like, hey man, something great came from this. It's like all these pine trees are trash. We got to get rid of them. I'm like, so like, like Mobile's decimated and roaches, like It's like, the Grinch, like his heart grew 3 sizes that day.
Well, I will say, personally, from knowing Brian, is like, I don't see Brian smile more than when I see him at Blakeley.
Yeah.
And he's just so giddy and excited to see all that come together. So that's good to see.
This year was really cool because his son was with us, Jack, his oldest son.
Oh, yeah.
So
he's a character.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
Oh,
so Jack followed me and Brian around all night. And, he's like, Brian tried to send him to bed. He's like, no, I want to stay with you in Landrum. And, we ended up we had some issues go on, and like we ended up having to go over to the federal lines at like 2:00 in the morning and all this other stuff. And like, about 3:00, we finally crawled up on top of the wall and sacked out. And like the next day, Jack's going like full speed. Like Brian's, not even conscious. And he's like, Dad. And, we end up finally getting like 2 cups of coffee, and Brian, and he can talk to humans again at that point.
Yeah.
And then like, I think it was like right after the battle, like Jack hit the wall and just crashed. But it was cool. I mean, like, he'll
inherit that kingdom one day.
Yeah.
One day all of this will be yours.
The heir apparent to read out full. But it's, it's funny because like, I remember the day he was born. I mean, it's the closest thing that I have to a nephew. And, now he's hitting me up on like Facebook Messenger, like, trash talking, like, where's my DOA? He wants me to make him a Department of Alabama jacket. I'm like, man, you're going to grow like 6 inches in 2 months. Like, I'm not going to make you a new jacket every 2 months. Yeah. But it's really cool because he started reading firsthand accounts now.
Nice.
So he'll call, he'll be in the truck with Brian, like on the way back from baseball. And, we're talking about,
that's cool.
Like Reb accounts with, my 12-year-old might as well be nephew. So it's fun.
That's great. Oh my gosh. Yeah. See, family affair, guys.
Yeah.
That's what's great for this. But, I want to talk a bit about how, you alluded to it earlier, how your wife, helping with commissary and things, and how you got inspired after a while. You really enjoyed the cooking aspect. But of course, a lot of people, and I think it's something that's not focused enough on sometimes, is the cooking and commissary for armies and soldiers in camp. Because, how often do we go to a mainstream event and you see everybody with Bojangles baskets or, and all this food, fry bread. And so it's amazing when you see the efforts that go with like an entire covered wagon or baking bread efforts, or, so if you could talk a bit about what you and your wife do and your team when you guys pull together like this to do a full scale commissary for like 100 guys, and the work that goes into doing that.
It my interest in it, well, my junior thesis in school was actually over the supply line at Vicksburg. So, and how much stuff was coming in through like Matamoros, Texas, and coming in between that keyhole between Port Hudson and Vicksburg, like the amount of beef, sugar, everything like that. And it's not going to the Army of Tennessee. It's not going to the Army at Vicksburg, and it's not going to the Trans-Mississippi Army. It's all head to Richmond. And you can really start seeing, especially after the fall of Vicksburg and Port Hudson, you can start seeing that fresh beef and sugar like really dropping off of like Confederate regimental returns and everything like that. But it was funny doing that research. Really kind of spawned, me wanting to do this more and more detail. So like even when I'm reading any firsthand account on like a campaign, like the last time that we did the Confederate living history at Franklin, we were, Baker Watkins and I and Jim Conley were individually reading books. And, that's kind of, you see something cool, you just throw it in. And like one of the quotes that we found was like, it was like the March of the 3 Ps. It was like pumpkin, parched corn and peas. And like, that's what so we issued out pumpkins at that event. And it's always funny when you do something like that. And, pumpkins in the 19th century were a food staple. It's like, it's identical to how we approach like squash.
Yeah.
And it's just something that they don't, we don't eat today.
Yeah.
And like, you issue out I remember giving guys pumpkins and like, what the heck? And like, and then when you read the firsthand account, it's like,
everybody
that's
carve
really
a pumpkin.
Cool. Yeah. We're going to make jack-o'-lanterns, little rebel lantern. So, and it's always neat because, it just like in, prepping that stuff and watching it come to fruition, or even, seeing changes like, when I started doing campaign stuff, it's like, oh, you just carry a canteen half and that's what you cook in. And then you start noticing, like, I mean, that's about as false as wearing, like, Tuscaloosa gray or something to me. Now looking at it, it's like, especially with the onset of like some of the great research articles that have come out from like the Liberty Rifles, like Craig's article on like skillet wagons and things like that, and just being able to read your own regimental history stuff and going, oh, that's what he's talking about. And like, making, issuing out flour at events and actually having people that have like the proper cast iron and stuff like that to make biscuits or make, corn pone or anything like that. And I think it changes it for the reenactor's perspective. But if you're fortunate and you're doing a program for the public, and we've proven this 100 times at, different events where there'll be different groups set up. Like if somebody's there portraying like a surgeon or something like that, we can, one of the things that like Tyler Gibson and I were doing for the Battle of Franklin Trust was when they had, blue and gray days, like school days, we would go and set up and there's like a guy that's got like 20 flags or something. And, a pastor and this dude doing a surgeon. And like, there's me and Tyler and somebody else like making corn pone or, talking about food and like federal rations and what they ate in the Army, what they ate coming up during the campaign. And it's amazing, like the amount of people that will come back to that. And that was, that attention to detail when we did the Craven's House Living History at Lookout. Their Lee White's boss came and checked it out. She like loved the detail. It's the same thing with the guys in the Liberty Guards. They did a program and they love the detail. So that's kind of what gets us ingrained with guys like the National Park, is because we've all been to an event where it's just like a gathering of people that are just completely unsafe and probably shouldn't be talking to the public. And then you have groups that are like dedicated to like, proper interpretation of both sides of the Civil War, the mechanics behind it, the politics behind it, people that know how to articulate and speak. And, you've got that group like showing these people what it looked like during 1861 to 65. And it's easy to work with parks after that.
Yeah. And they must see that. And it's easy to see the guys who put work behind what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I can attest to that with the, I'm attracted to seeing a well-run machine like this too, where you see a well-working commissary working like that. Like I know the events I've attended with you guys, especially winter quarters in the past, is seeing the effort. Like it's just nonstop work too. So like if all the women are out there early in the morning getting stuff ready, or like there's just constant activity, cleaning dishes, preparing the dishes, cooking the food. But like just a couple weeks ago, I did that Tom Travis's event at the Drell Plantation in Georgia, and we had all we did all weekend was cook stuff. And so Ian McMullen, Chef Ian,
Kiss,
that dude was just cooking all day long. And we had that plantation site had a syrup making festival once a year, and it's like the biggest attended event all year at this place. And there may have been 700 or 800 people showing up at this thing. So we had constant public interaction. And we weren't doing anything besides sitting around the campfire and cooking and watching Ian work his magic. But you should have seen the amount of people that I remember thinking like, oh, is anyone going to care? We're not shooting today. We're not doing any demos like that. But we still had droves of people coming up, just staring at the fire and being like, what are you guys cooking? Like, are you going to eat this? And they're shocked that not only are we cooking stuff, like, and so he was preparing collard greens. He made sweet potato souffle and fried chicken.
Oh, wow.
And it's some of the best eating I've had. He's like, Sherman's bummers ain't well, man. And, so I was wondering too, like, it's good to know that when you guys do these things for the public, that the public isn't just walking past it. Like they are attracted to that scene, like, whoa, there's some intelligence behind this. And what are you guys doing? Like,
oh yeah.
And, or like getting issued pumpkins at an event like that. And I'd be the same way. If you handed me a pumpkin event, what am I supposed to do with it? But like, it's a learning process for us all to kind of, I know for me, I feel bad. And I know you could probably rant about this, where I've been to a number of events, and I'm guilty of this too, where we get issued like cornmeal, and nobody ends up doing anything with it. And then you see like a pile of cornmeal left on the side of the road.
Yeah, that was a real big reason why we started. If you register for an event and you don't and you just basically waste rations. You're taking money away from the preservation donation.
Yeah.
So to kind of mitigate that, there are guys like Seth Hancock or like Ian McMillan that can cook, and like I would rather issue that stuff out and not have those two guys on a drill field like making biscuits and controlling the waste, because like our waste control from Blakeley, the original one, to like this last one is like immense, because like Liz did a bunch of digging into what was available in Mobile at that point in time, and like she kind of changed stuff like any of the vegetables and things like that we issue, and just being appropriate about it, because it does take away from it. It's like your cost associated with the event. Your meat's always going to be the most expensive thing, and that's having properly sourced meat is getting harder and harder to find. And it's one of those things that like it absolutely threw me off when I'd walk around and see like thousands of dollars of bacon that people just like were too dense to cook over an open fire and didn't know what to do with it. And that was too one of the things that kind of drew me away from doing adjuncts. It's like I mean, I'm a bigger guy. If I have a choice between eating, I'm at a mainstream event and I have a choice between eating like old Uncle Carl's cheeseburger wagon or eating cornmeal in camp, I'm gonna go get a burger. Yeah,
that's the temptation when you have fry bread stand stuff at a mainstream event. But like when you're out in the wilderness, though, like I'm gonna eat what's served to me, kind of thing. You have no choice but to eat this. But we can all learn something. Like I want to get better myself at it, because when I do see people working their magic, like Ian, these guys, like well, they started somewhere, and and I wanted. Like, I don't want to be the guy that's like wasting stuff. And then it seems like every mess, every group is in the same boat right now, where there are guys who we've all been doing this for years. And so you have no problem with a dude that's willing to drop the musket for a weekend to cook. Like, it's almost like now you're at a point where there's guys like waiting in line. I'll be able to cook this weekend. As long as they know what they're doing.
It's really comparable, because you can see it in, original accounts and everything like that, from officers up to enlisted, where they've messed together. And I can't remember the guy, but he's an officer in the Army of Tennessee, and he's talking about messing with other officers, and like he describes the mess, and like at the end of this, he's like, it's basically would be like, and Andrew Jerem can't cook, so we let him do something else. Like it's like they've picked out, who's good at this and who's not. And Andrew can't cook. I'm just using him as like a reference point, but it's funny, because even now, you can walk around, if we've all done stuff together long enough, you walk around and you see somebody, cooking at a fire that really probably can't tie their shoes, and it's like, well, they're going to be eating burnt bacon. Like, it's just kind of, it happened then and it happens now. It's kind of, to me, that's one of the funny things about the hobby.
Oh yeah. Like I can imagine even back then in the real days where all these companies like arguing over the better chef and the other company, man, that guy in company D always cooks the best biscuits. And our joker in company C can't do shit. So I get that. But I hear a doorbell out there. Mr. Witt gonna go check out who's over there. I bet it's another guest. Another guest has arrived. But no, I do want to talk about how, you mentioned Michael Clark and the Liberty Rifles, and you guys work closely, you're closely associated with all of them, and you're inspired by what they do, and likewise. So like, can you talk a little bit about, of course, Liberty Rifles are East Coast pretty much. They got all the Virginia battlefields covered basically, and you guys have a lot of the Western battlefields covered, at least especially in the Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama now. So it's like, how would you talk about the importance of supporting their events, and then they also are supporting you guys, and how you're helping to expand that? And it's almost like having divisions across the country all on the same page and bettering the hobby. And all this.
I work obviously closely with them with the Liberty Rifles, but there's like Badger Light Infantry, Rob Warren's group, the Gavin and the Liberty Guards, and even like Lips and the Croakers. That, like, to me, that's like and Jonas still claims the dead rabbits, down in Mississippi, and him and Mitten's group. But I think everybody's gotten that same challenge, because if you look at the pictures of all the groups, like Rob's in Wisconsin, and then Lips and them main bases in Missouri. But if you start looking, like, I think everybody went to events like, oh, we can do that, or we should do that, and took away like little bits. Like, I really think, I got to participate in some great stuff in the early 2000s with the campaigner movement, and really seeing like the Western Independent Grays and like the AOP and Columbia Rifles, when they were functioning as large groups, really do great stuff. But I think, to me, and it's probably just like, like a football player thinks that his era was the best era of the sport.
Yeah.
But like, to me, there's more people on the same page from different areas still doing the same level of interpretation. Like, everybody's got their own twist and brand on it, but it is important. I mean, I talk to via text, most of those guys probably on a daily or every other day basis, even if it's just like, hey, what do you think about this? Or, just throwing ideas, after each other. I think we're all just in awe at some of the stuff that the hobby as a whole right now has been able to pull off, especially looking at things like First Section.
Yeah.
Because like Kent Ostenstead and those guys had a great team, back in the 90s and early 2000s and everything. But to see, the pictures from the park and those events and things like that, just how big and impactful that stuff was. And
like that video had like 250,000 views or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful video, just seeing like the whole battery going down that road. And it really does look like you're looking into a window of what it actually looked like, seeing a battery go past your farm or something.
Yeah, and that's why I like the Liberty Rifles winter quarters, or the winter quarter site here at Confederate Memorial Park, or even Readout 4 at Blakeley, is because you do have the ability to get that window, and it's like you can sit in one of the buildings at either one of those sites, or the bunker at Blakeley, and it's just like you've got that 360 of no modern anything.
And it's easy to forget where you are. Like, you really do feel like, when I go to winter quarters, like, and I'm looking forward to this January, but like I forget. I remember when I went to the parking lot after the last one, it was just like, you forget, like, oh yeah, like civilization isn't that far away. Like, it's easy when you're in those buildings and things, like, just easy, like, you feel like you're back in time like that.
Yeah, it's always surreal coming out of, the building that I stay in, and like, especially if the Saturday night barracks party is already kicked off. Just the acoustics of just the Civil War. I mean, that's what those guys heard.
Yeah.
And it definitely puts a different spin on things to me.
I miss I love good music in camp, and it seems like that's another thing that's lacking in the hobby a lot.
Yeah.
And I love when you just, like, especially if you're in a whole battalion camp and you see multiple companies partying in their own ways, and you see the cooking, everybody's cooking or everybody's singing, and it really does change the whole attitude of camp too. And
field music to me, makes or breaks an event, because if the guys in the independent fife and drum can't put something on, and like they're not there, like always, like sad emoji Calvin, like after the event, it's like, I missed you, man. Like, because, if you're at like winter quarters, or you're at Blakeley, or any event where those guys put anything, I mean, the band at Sharpsburg was great. And, when we were doing First Minnesota, going toward the site, and they're playing, I mean, it adds a completely different element to reenacting. And that, there were fife and drum groups, in the early 2000s and stuff, but it wasn't like, there wasn't this like consolidated consortium of guys from like Camp Chase Fife and Drum, or Calvin and them, that are just guys that are hangers on and independent musicians that are trying to come together and do stuff.
Well, it's great to see the best of the best.
Oh yeah.
For music, cooking, drill, all come together, and to see the magic happen is wonderful. And that's what makes some of these videos trending online, when you just see all of it come together. And for the public to see that is a great thing, because sometimes, I mean, a lot of what we do is for our own, benefit, our own events. But when you get to do these public living histories, is always a great thing to kind of show people just how it can be and how different it can be from what they're used to and what they're accustomed to. But Pat, what are some of your events? I know you just mentioned in a couple weeks you have one at Franklin,
Right.
but if you could share, like, what are some of the next public events for like listeners and spectators to go check out and watch?
So we're going to be at the Carter House on December 1st through the 3rd, doing the 57th Indiana Company C. Just a lot of public drill. I'll be cooking. Rob Warren's going to lead the company at that one.
Yeah.
And then we did go to Winter Quarters 1862 at Confederate Memorial Park, where we're portraying the 22nd Alabama again. It's supposed to be set when they're in winter quarters outside of Mobile in 62 prior to them marching off.
Yeah.
So the flag that we actually had that Tyler Underwood made, the flag that we fly there is actually a copy off of their early war flag. It's huge.
Yeah.
And then the first section's putting on We Soon Got Proud, which is a private event, but it's a artillery regiment, for lack of a better phrase, a reserve regiment.
Yeah.
And and then there will be something maybe by the time you put this out at Chickamauga, but their interpretive team has to meet and decide what they're going to do on the calendar.
Yeah.
But Gavin Thomas and I, independently, unbeknownst to the other one, approached Chickamauga to do something, for the anniversary next year. So he presented a Georgia regiment, like do a multiple company, not like a full scale regiment at Chickamauga, but to do a Confederate living history there. And I approached him about doing 96 Illinois. So it's gonna be one or the other. It's not, I'm not gonna go head to head with Gavin.
No.
Gavin's not gonna go head to head when that's not how this works. But we've given interpretive ideas to the park, and they can make the decision on what they want, and the same guys will be there.
That's good. I'm kind of bummed that nothing really happened like that for the 160th.
Yeah.
Because I was kind of surprised. It's like it kind of came and went once again. I mean, we had the mainstream event, but I was kind of like, I kind of wish there was some big effort at the park.
Yeah, I mean,
160. If there was a little things, there was some things they did.
Yeah. I think it was like the weekend before the National they did something.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they did Walter came up and they
did two little tandem things.
Yeah.
They did like the 4 Florida and something on Snodgrass.
Yeah,
I think, but it just wasn't a full scale thing.
Yeah, and we got kind of behind on that because Lee had asked me, and I'm like Perryville's like 2 weeks after that.
It's hard.
And it was kind of like the program we put on Lookout was the first time we did anything. The Independent Rifles hosted anything in Georgia, because I just always, that's our regards turf. It's like,
I all the 5 points.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to that, man.
And then the big one is we're going to do a regimental at Carnton for the 160th Franklin.
That's right.
But it'll be December 6th through the 8th. Like the weekend of the 30th is Thanksgiving weekend, and like getting guys, travel. But that's something that when Mike Clark and his family came down to the house, like I took him to Carnton, and he was just kind of like, and then I took him to the big field in the front, and he's like, oh yeah, we got to do something here. So, he and I have been talking about that for years, and we're still working on a citizens aspect of what they can do, but
sure.
It's going to be a very unique program, because we are going to spend, they're going to open the house up at night, and they're going to spend, a pretty good amount of time, because everybody talks about Franklin is November 30th, 1864, when like the McGavocks were dealing with the dead the rest of their natural life, but they still had wounded people inside of Carnton for the next like 16 months. So we're going to, not so much the carnage, more about the recovery, talks about the house and things like that. So, and then it's crazy to think we're going to roll into another Blakeley. So it'll be, me and Uncle Rob smashing and gashing against one another again this year. So, and, it's always funny, because I've got if we do a program, I don't want to talk about reenacting or the next event for like a week or at least a couple of days. And like, I left Blakeley, and before I even, got to Montgomery, Brian's texted me. He's like, we got to talk about next time. I'm like, God, man, give it a rest. Like,
because it rotates every
every
so
other
you
year.
do a battle
Yeah.
and then usually like a living history event and then
Yeah.
like a battle event, and so the next battle is 2025.
Yeah, and
Which that works perfect. Yeah, for
yeah.
160th.
Yeah, and it's we've got like Tim Arnold's at Shiloh and everything like that, and we don't want to like make guys choose between doing interpretive stuff there and doing stuff down with Brian. But Brian does a Veterans Day program and either Living History or the Big Battle, and like it was just I think it works out better to do it every other year because you don't want to stale out the site, but it's also a lot of work because, like I just said, like the work for the next one starts like the day after, and it's a lot of phone calls, a lot of time, and Brian. There's only so much of Brian.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear. Well, there's a lot to look forward to, and again, like it sure sounds like the hobby is dead, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's so much to look forward to, and I can't wait for the We Soon Got Proud too, because my ancestor was artillery, so I'm kind of coming full circle with that one.
And they just the Liberty Rifles just announced something about they're doing like an 1861 event at Appomattox.
Oh wow!
Like called To the Step, and
wow.
I can't make it up to that one, but I mean I went to Appomattox Village for the first time 2 years ago, and that's such a cool setting to do a program.
Yeah. No, well, there's always something in the works. That's what's good, and there you go.
Weird shirts and nerdy hats. It's there.
That'll be the name of the event. Another one coming. Well, as we wind down here, Pat, I kind of like to ask a few fun questions. Like, of course, you've been researching a lot over the years for a lot of these events, and but over time, or do you have a favorite like pet regiment that you go back to in your own research a lot, or is there someone that you prefer to study a lot compared to others? Or for some guys, I know it's always their favorite regiment is the next one that they're researching.
I've got 3, and 2 are probably no surprise to anybody that's been around me for 5 minutes, and 1 is probably going to even confuse you. But the 3rd Mississippi is the regiment that was raised where I grew up, and the guy that I am named after and that my son is named after, the Finley portion of that, his ancestor gave a lot of quotes to his name was Frederick Searle Hughes, and a lot of the quotes that Frederick gave ended up in Grady Howell's book.
Okay.
So, in most of the stuff, like the original research content, like the original documents for that, got washed away in Katrina when the family home got knocked out. So, and with the 3rd Mississippi, that's the group that Brian and Roach grew up reenacting in. Chris Stacy grew up reenacting in. I started out in. We transitioned to another group, but they were always around. So that's why we're doing the 3rd Mississippi at Franklin, because there's so much personal tie to it with me. Even like knowing the history of like the captain of Company E, like J.P. Elmer. He marched off to war in 1861, and when he's killed at the Battle of Franklin, he's like 21 or 22 years old, and he's buried there in the cemetery, and it's wild for me to sit there and look at Elmer's grave and then go down to Biloxi and see where his father's buried, and even like the Biloxi Historical Society has a lot of stuff on them, and I posted this on the event page about it, but they were immigrants, so we weren't even here that long. And just to see that story, and like you can't go to a historic cemetery in South Mississippi of any size, in Gulfport, Biloxi, past Bay St. Louis, where these guys were raised. I mean, Gulfport wasn't there, but and not see one of those stones. So it would definitely be the 3rd. Grady Howell did a great job compiling that book.
I have it.
Yeah, it's man, it's a heavy one. It makes a thud when it hits the
it's
when
like
it hits the board.
pages.
Yeah. And and then the 6th Mississippi is something that's always real close to me. And it's weird because I read about the 6th when I was growing up, because the commander, Colonel Thornton, that was hit at Shiloh, he's buried in the Episcopal churchyard not far from my mom's house. So like even after Katrina, when that churchyard was destroyed, like I went out there and stood his stone back up and cleaned it up. So, I read about Thornton in the 6th before I got like everybody that grew up, was a teenager doing this hobby, like, before I got really nerdy about Claiborne, like I knew who like Thornton and the 6th Mississippi were. And then like, on the federal side, there's, 137th New York.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yeah. I like 12th Corps.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was just one of those things that's,
Yeah.
that was, it just,
that was David Ireland's regiment,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So, when we went up, I can't remember what trip it was to Gettysburg, but Phil Brown that works at Gettysburg took Jim Conley and I around to some sites, and like that was the first time I really got to spend a lot of time up on Culp's Hill.
Yeah.
So, Phil walked us around and talked to us about David Ireland and everything, and it was a wild regiment. And then when I started doing the research into doing the Lookout Mountain program, guess who's in the middle of all that is David Ireland.
Yeah.
So like I got really deep into them for a while.
Yeah.
But that's, there's also a book, I can't even think, it's like Tough as a Boiled Owl or something. I think I talked to you about that before.
Okay. About the 137?
No, this is another one. This is a Vermont guy that's stationed down in Pensacola pretty much the entirety of the war. So he's given like garrison life at, McCree, which is no longer there, Pickens and Barrancas.
Okay.
And he ends up going on the expedition with Grant to dig the canal and ends up getting like rheumatism, and like that ends up haunting him like the rest of his life. But he never really sees any like what you would think of as like real combat, and he gets really defensive in the book. I mean, it's a funny book. It's like, his friends writing him. It's like, oh well, Stephen, they were at Gettysburg, and like he's writing back like, well, we know war down here too. Like, it's like, but it's a good book. But yeah, it's for me, for whatever reason, it's the 3rd and 6th, and then the Missouri Brigade is just growing up doing Vicksburg research and being that close to Blakeley and being so interested in Franklin, that's like cream of the crop top for me.
Yeah. Man, well, that's a lot. I'm going to have to put all those in the show notes there. That's some good ones. But, and as we wrap up, one thing I like to ask is, obviously, you're spoiled in the sense that you live right off of battlefields in Middle Tennessee here, and you're on the ground where soldiers walk through, and you're familiar with all these different homes and farm sites and houses and battlefields there. But like for you personally, you go everywhere, but if there's a day where you just want to get out or meditate on a battlefield or a specific site, is there a place that you personally like to visit a lot?
Franklin related?
Yeah, anything. Franklin
related would be the cemetery at Carton.
Yeah. Well, that is impactful.
Yeah. And when I was given tours there part time, I would get there early to open up, and I would go out and like drink my coffee in the cemetery.
Yeah.
But man, the
how many are buried there? Like, man, quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's one in Knoxville that Pat Hollis at Mayberry Hazen House had told me is actually bigger, but the claim is it's the largest private Confederate cemetery is at Carton. And I know there's 424 Mississippians there, but I can't remember I used to know that a long time ago, but that's gotten washed out of my brain with Bluey lyrics and things like that for the kids. But like to me, the most, my favorite place Civil War wise is Craven's house.
Yeah.
I mean, I love being up at Point Park.
Yeah. Well, you can't beat that view.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you were at the Living History we were talking about earlier.
The picture.
Yeah, the picture. But you remember the baseball game when they started shooting off the fireworks and everything like that?
Oh, yeah.
It was
just we were sitting there at night looking down. That was cool.
Yeah, just like in Sandlot. No, it's crazy to like look down at Chattanooga and there'd be a fog, and then you start seeing what
I remember watching all the high speed chases and police cars.
Yeah.
But that was cool. Yeah, we living historians have the privilege of being on these battlefields after hours, if you will, and to experience some things that you won't experience otherwise. And so, Yeah, that's a beautiful sight right there, and I love just hanging out up there.
Yeah.
And by the way, like if you go up there for an event in June and when it's hot as hell down in the valley, you go up there and it's like, wow, it's actually cool and comfortable up here. And
It's
so,
neat to see when they have
I,
inversion and there's a lot of weather in the valley.
yeah,
And there's
yeah,
clouds covering the entire city. You don't see anything else. You're on top of the world.
yeah, it's great.
The park at the preserve park in Spring Hill is like real special to me, but that was probably one of the last Civil War sites that me and my dad got to go to together.
Okay.
So that
Yeah.
that's still a real special place. I mean, it took me years after he died before I'd even go back up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot. I mean, sitting on the gun carriage at Fort Gaines, overlooking Mobile Bay. It's just, I mean, we get to experience a lot. That a lot, and it's in situations like parks are different when it's quiet.
Yeah.
And like I think that like the biggest blessing is probably like some of the solitude that I've had at events, and and the peace about it. It's just
it is. I love. It's almost like a spiritual retreat of
yeah.
sorts. Like when you put your phone away and your phone's in the car for 3 days.
Yeah.
You're away. Like I lose track of everything. Like when I go to an event, like I forget what was happening at work that week. I forget all the stresses at home. Like you just go and all you're thinking about is the mindset of what a soldier would have been and doing and talking a little bit about like the first person aspect. We don't really do that as much, but it comes natural where you're just talking about what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Like these guys would be talking about the weather, how tired they are, how sick they are, how hungry they are,
how bad the food is.
Or like, and when we talk about prior events, it's like the same way they'd be talking about the battles that they fought, and so it comes naturally. But anyway, as we wrap this up, I want to thank you, Pat, for
no problem. Glad to do it
today. Glad you finally came in person here in studio. And I'm looking forward to a busy day ahead here of podcasting. But yeah, stay tuned, everyone. I want to thank everyone for listening, and I'll be pumping out some more content here. I'm looking forward to a lot of new ideas next year, and I'm looking forward to all these events to participate in, all the stories that are going to come out of all these future events that we attend. So thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for more. And thanks again, Patrick.
Thanks, man.